Debt and deficits have in the past dominated election campaigns in this country and province. Think of Paul Martin's demand in the 1990s to slay the deficit dragon, quote, come hell or high water. Even in the last federal election, the NDP ran on a promise of balancing the budget. This time around, concerns about debt and deficits are barely registering. Why? Let's ask. Kaylee Thiessen, she's an economist with the trade union Unifor. Garima Talwar Kapoor, Director, Policy and Research with Maytree. She's formerly a policy advisor with the Ontario Ministry of Finance. Brian Milner, freelance business and economics writer and a contributor to the Globe and Mail. And Andrew Coyne, columnist with the National Post. And we are delighted to welcome everybody back to the program, except you. First time for you.
Yes.
Lovely to have you here. That's great.
You.
We often like to start on this program by quoting some sage just to sort of get us started. And today we will do the same. Andrew, are you ready? We're quoting you.
Ready for my close-up.
Andrew Coyne from the National Post writes, do deficits matter? To read the Liberal election platform, you'd have to say no. The party proposes $57 billion in new spending over the next 4 years, most of it borrowed. The deficit would hit $27 billion next year and remain in excess of $20 billion throughout and presumably beyond. But what's significant about the Liberal platform isn't the size of the deficits, it's their permanence. Unlike in 2015, the party does not even pretend to commit to balancing the budget. Not after 4 years, not ever. The new standard, rather, is a steadily declining debt-to-GDP ratio from 30.9% of GDP today to a projected 30.2% 4 years out. That's where I'd like to start because, Kaylee, we need a smart economist here, and thankfully we have one, who can explain to us why the absolute number, what the deficit number is, 27 billion, 35 billion, is less important than the debt-to-GDP ratio. What does that mean?
Yeah, so the debt-to-GDP ratio is just a comparison of the size of the federal debt to the size of the Canadian economy. It's just essentially two numbers, right? Debt over GDP. And a move in either one of those numbers can actually change the ratio. So if the size of the economy is growing faster than the size of the debt, then the ratio shrinks. If the size of the debt is growing faster than the economy, or if the economy declines, then that ratio actually grows.
In your view, is that a better way to measure the kind of fiscal health of the province or country at any time?
I think it's one important way to measure the fiscal health of our economy at any one time. So economists look at a number of different measures of affordability. The debt to GDP ratio is an important one. We'd also look at interest rates, which are currently at all-time or near all-time lows. We look at the credit rating score, which is very high and stable. And we'd also look at interest payments as a portion of revenue, which is about 7%. So if we take a look at all of those things together at this particular point in time, the debt is not something to be extremely worried about.
Garima, I still want to focus in, though, on the one metric that Kaylee just mentioned, and that is the debt-to-GDP ratio. In your view, is that a better way to measure the overall fiscal health of the economy as opposed to just what the actual number of the deficit is?
I think people will get it more than an absolute value that actually doesn't take into size or take into account the relative size of the economy or health of the economy. And so when, even though it might sound more abstract to say net debt to GDP ratio is higher or lower, we can actually surmise or assess how well we are doing relative to our debt payments and interest payments that we have to pay on debt relative to an abstract $27 billion deficit, which I think for a common person is a number that is not easily quantifiable, or the magnitude relative to the largesse of our economy is not easily known.
I think we discovered in the past that a $15 glass of orange juice is something understandable. A $27 billion deficit just doesn't register in the same way. Brian, give me your sense about whether or not, as long as the debt to GDP number is going down, it's okay to run deficits.
Well, I think there are important reasons to actually run deficits. And you can do them permanently if you're using them to fund things that are important to the economy, important to the health of the population. The problem becomes, and we see that in this election campaign, when you just want to promise the moon to get voters on your side. And then it becomes more dangerous because you're basically throwing money at people for things that they may think they need, they may not need, and none of these parties has really costed the risks that are associated with these promises. So then it becomes a problem.
Do I infer from your column that you are less sold on this whole, as long as the debt to GDP number is going down, we're okay, we can continue to run deficits willy-nilly?
It's both true and untrue. We don't turn into pumpkins because we run a deficit in 1 year. We don't turn into pumpkins if we run 10 deficits. It depends on the size of the deficits. So it's certainly true that numbers only have meaning in comparison to one another. The deficit or the debt is only meaningful to us as a percentage of GDP or interest costs, percentage of revenues. Those are all meaningful terms. Where I part company is when people just say, well, we're just going to look at debt to GDP ratio, and that's all we need to know. We need to know a number of things. First of all, debts are made up of accumulated deficits. If you run large enough deficits, your debt to GDP ratio will go up. So you can't just stop looking at the deficit, as seems to be sometimes inferred. Secondly, just saying debt to GDP ratio doesn't tell us what should that be. It's at 30% now. Is that the optimal number? Maybe it should be lower. Thirdly, we can't just look at a fixed point in time. One of the things that concerns me is if you keep running deficits, if you keep building up debt, even at a modest rate, if you are building up trouble, if you are doing so 10 years into an expansion, at some point, sooner or later, a recession is going to come. Typically, deficits get much larger in those things, and you have to be concerned about that. So it's just, it doesn't answer the question, I guess, just to say debt to GDP ratio. You still have to ask questions about what's prudent. I think the problem is that we got in the 90s used to the idea that we had a debt crisis on our hands, and we did. But it's still a good idea to try to run a tight ship even when you don't have a crisis on your hands so that you don't get back into one. And merely the fact that you don't have the wolf at your door doesn't mean you should stop thinking about what's the balance between our revenues and our expenditures. So there's a lot of other questions besides just what's the right target.
Let me pluck one number under there and Kaylee follow up with you on that. Andrew said right now, federally, we're running a debt level that's about 30% of the value of the economy. In Ontario, I think it's 40%. So our debt ratio in the province of Ontario is significantly worse than what the federal government is facing right now. What we don't know, I guess, or maybe I need to lean on your expertise here, is what's a good number?
It's a good question. And essentially, we don't know exactly what the number is, much like when we're talking about inequality. We're not looking for one specific level, but whether or not we can manage the level that we have and look to the future to do the things that we want to do. So right now, we look at the debt to GDP ratio. We also look at interest rates, the size of the deficit, other things, and together can surmise that the debt is not something to worry about at the moment. But to point to one number and say that's the only number we should look to is actually quite impossible.
Well, Garima, should I infer that 30% is okay, but 40%, the way the Ontario government is going right now, is too high?
No, I think back to Kaylee's point, it's about where do we want to go and whether what we have bought with our debt is worthwhile and valuable to Ontarians. I think that in Canada we make some false dichotomies between what the federal government can hold in terms of its net debt to GDP ratio versus the province, when in terms of our federalism, there might be room actually for the federal government to step in and help the province, Ontario or Alberta, or whichever province it is, to help with some much needed public service investments that it might need. I think in 2017, the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy from the University of Ottawa said that there is room in Canada or for the federal government to increase almost permanently how much it spends or how much it reduces in tax revenue by just less than, I think, about 1%. And meanwhile, Ontario also had some room at that time, less than the federal government. But, and this was within the context of Canada Health Transfers. And the federal government at that time did not give Ontario what it needed in terms of its CHT transfer. And perhaps if it did, the federal government could have maintained its sustainability while also helping Ontario maintain its sustainability.
Andrew.
There's a reason, though, why people are more worried about Ontario and the provinces in general. So it's not just the debt to GDP ratio now, which is at 40 going towards 45. It's what's coming down the pike. And that is you've got the aging of the population, which is going to hit all of us. It is hitting us now. It's going to continue to do so over the next 20, 30 years. Where we're already spending close to half of Ontario's tax revenues just on one program, on healthcare. That's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the worry is that debt to GDP ratio, if it's that high now in good times, add in a recession, add in the aging of the population, because the main cost of aging population is healthcare. And it's mostly going to be a burden on the provinces. So we talk about the federal debt to GDP ratio. We say, oh, it's fine. But they're all borrowing from the same pool. You've got the feds, you've got the provinces, you've got the private sector, enormous private sector debts at the same time. So it's just, is it prudent for the feds to be adding to that when you've got these particular problems at the provincial level, or should the feds be keeping a tighter ship so as to prepare for the storms that are to come?
The problem is that if they keep a tighter ship, most of the costs that they used to cover go down to the provinces anyway, and that's what happened after Paul Martin balanced the budget. All of a sudden, Ontario and Manitoba and other provinces were stuck with huge social costs, and some of those get passed down to municipalities, which is what the Harris government did. Something suffers, services suffer. There's only one taxpayer, so it doesn't really matter if you get your federal taxes cut, if your provincial taxes have to go up to cover some of these things.
But I want to get a better sense of the number, Brian. You know, there are countries in Europe, of course, that have debt to GDP ratios at 100 or 150.
Well, try ours at about 89 if you add in the provinces and the federal government, which is higher than, I think, any of the other G7 countries, including Italy, which is 61 or 62.
Okay, so having said that, though, as we're looking at this and trying to decide, are we carrying too much debt? Is the debt level acceptable? Do we need to reduce the size of our debt and deficits? If we're at 30 federally and 40 in the province of Ontario, are those okay numbers?
They're okay today because interest rates are so low. There's nothing that says they won't go up. There's nothing that says there won't be a severe recession, which will reduce revenues. All those things have to be factored in. The risks don't change. They're the same as they were in the mid-90s when Paul Martin was dealing with this huge fiscal problem. They just haven't shown up yet. Doesn't mean they won't.
Andrew, put your political scientist hat on for a second, take your economist hat off, and just talk to us about, I want to compare last year's Ontario election with the current federal election. There's been precious little talk about the significance of debts and deficits in this federal election campaign. A year and change ago, however, in the province of Ontario, the Progressive Conservatives under Doug Ford certainly beat the drum hard on the fact that, in their view, the Liberal government of the day was running deficits the size of $15 billion a year, and that the debt to GDP ratio, which the Liberals always said should never go over 40, went over 40. Why such a big deal a year ago, and all of a sudden, a year later, it's just not a big deal at all?
Well, we've been discussing this. It's partly because the situation of the provinces is different than the situation of the feds. The feds ultimately, of course, have the printing press. That's not something I recommend, but sovereign debt of a national government is always slightly different than debts of provinces, and therefore they're treated differently in the credit ratings, for example. So it's a more difficult conundrum that Ontario is facing. It's also that the political alignment is different. The Liberals federally in 2015 broke the taboo on running deficits, and so it changed the alignment federally for that reason. As I say, there are more reasons to try to balance your budget than just because you're in a debt crisis. You can be prudent even without waiting for the crisis to arrive. And there's more reasons to want to control spending than just balancing the budget. Part of the problem, I think, in our politics is the right in particular got very used to just saying, well, we can't spend on that program just because we have a deficit. So when the deficit disappears, what's your argument against spending on that program? And so that's how you get, universal subsidies for camping trips. We just simply stop looking at things and saying, is this the wisest use of scarce dollars? Because everything ultimately is scarce. So I think we need to get back to looking at, since the crisis federally is not at our door, we need to get back at looking at saying, is this the best possible expenditure of that money? Could we spend it for a better use? Would it be better use given back to taxpayers in tax cuts? Have those kind of discussions than just, oh my goodness, there's either a crisis or if there's no crisis, then anything goes.
I'm inferring from your comment you're not a big fan of tax credits for riding the bus or taking camping trips or putting your kids in hockey?
The Conservative Party federally and provincially have simply turned themselves on their head. That's the sort of social engineering, micro-targeting, distortionary tax preferences the Conservatives used to rail against. What they found was it's a nice way to deliver spending, except you call it a tax credit instead.
Can I get you on this issue of why in this election campaign debt and deficits are barely spoken about, whereas a year ago in the Ontario election campaign, it did come up a lot?
It did come up a lot, and I think part of the difference is just that in the Ontario election, there was a party that offered a more straight and quick pathway to a balanced budget, where federally we're not seeing that. And so the Conservatives provincially offered that or used that as a wedge issue, and federally the Conservatives are trying to distance themselves from the Ford government that did that. So they're making different issues the wedge issues, and it might not be so much that people care more or less about it than they used to, but that's what's on offer.
Were you working in the Ministry of Finance during last year's election campaign?
I was.
You were. Okay. Can I get you to tell some tales out of school here?
I can't break my oath of office.
Oh, come on, break it. We won't say anything, honestly. But did people in the Ministry of Finance, as the deficit started to get bigger and bigger for the provincial Liberals, and as the debt-to-GDP ratio hit 40%, did you folks at Finance start to say to yourselves over there in the frost block, what gives here? These guys are, go ahead, fill in the blank.
Yeah, no. So I'll just help clarify my role. I worked in the income security policy area, which meant that I got to work at the nexus of social policy and fiscal policy. And it's one of those rare spaces where you get to see where line ministries like the Ministry of Health or Community and Social Services come to the Ministry of Finance and Treasury Board to say, you know, this is what we'd like, and can you help us move it through the process? To answer your question, I think that I won't answer it directly.
Oh, you're being so careful here.
No. But I will. I'd like to answer as a resident of Ontario and as a citizen of our country. I think that the challenge was that the former government spent a lot of political capital in wanting to balance the budget for 2017.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And during that time, there was, I think, while they did balance the budget, it was paralleled by an erosion in public services. And so it was this idea of, okay, well, you know, to balance the budget, it comes at the cost of this. And suddenly, when the election rolled around, the idea of balancing a budget was not only thrown out of the window, it was just completely dismissed and blown up. Yeah. And I think that created a political opportunity for other political opponents to step in and talk about the value for money that Ontarians were getting from their governments.
We should say there are other provinces that are in much worse predicament than Ontario. The parliamentary budget
measured how?
Measured by debt to GDP,
okay.
And measured by where they're going rather than where they're at. So the Parliamentary Budget Office did a report a little while ago where they projected the debt to GDP ratios for the provinces 25, 50, 75 years out. Usually you look at those numbers with a large grain of salt because a lot can change between now and then. But those numbers are basically based on demographics, the aging of the population, and healthcare. Demographics, we can predict that pretty certainly. Healthcare is really hard to change. And you're looking at, for Manitoba, Newfoundland, and New Brunswick in particular, you're looking at debt to GDP ratios within 25 years well in excess of 100%, headed for 200% 50 years from now. Not unavoidable, but a real challenge coming down the pike. And to put that in context, when Saskatchewan nearly hit the wall in the 90s, yes, they were at 60%. So we've got provinces, and one more thing on that is, if you're a young person in those provinces and you're looking at those numbers, what's your thought is, I better get out of here before I get hit with all the tax increases that this is going to require, which just accentuates the spiral. So we've got provinces 25, 30 years from now looking at real fiscal challenges where there's conceivable that they could be defaulting on their debts.
You advanced an idea there, and I want to have some discussion about that right now. Deficits today, Kaylee, do they equal tax increases tomorrow?
Possibly, and it depends, again, on the size of the debt to GDP ratio and the choices that governments are going to make in the future. Personally, as a person that lives in Canada and sees a number of crises coming down the front, including the need to address climate change, I want to see our governments prioritize reconciliation. I want to see our governments address the potential for massive technological change and the need for education and training and transition support that comes with that, and numerous other things. Then I'm probably willing to pay I'm definitely willing to pay more in taxes and potentially more in debt in order to make those things happen to build the Canada that I actually want to live in.
Okay, but Brian, I want to know whether or not you can draw a straight line, excuse me, between the money that we are borrowing today to pay for healthcare, to pay for education, to pay for a military, all of these things. Can you draw a straight line between the money we borrow to do that and future tax increases?
Not necessarily. I mean, it depends on whether governments are committed to maintaining the same service level. If you have a government like ours in Ontario, they're more committed to tax cuts and lower service costs. Governments can do that, and then it's up to citizens to say, well, I don't want this kind of government because they're screwing around with my basic services. But that's what happens. And then you have certain governments that spend very badly. They make mistakes. They spend money when it's A, not necessary, and B, when it's not productive in terms of growth and in terms of economic expansion. And then you have cases like Alberta, which frittered away this huge surpluses that it got from the oil and gas sector and ended up throwing it away on tax cuts. That's what happened. Happened under Ralph Klein, and it happened under subsequent premiers. And so they have no cushion when things went really badly, and all of a sudden they're hit with a recession that they can't handle. And I look at a country like Norway, which does not do that, and Norway is one of the few countries, developed countries in the world, that consistently run surpluses. That's because they understand where their revenues come from and what services they can provide.
One of the things, though, I read, Mike Moffat, and Mike Moffat, he's been a guest on this program, Ivy School of Business and so on. Mike had a piece out the other day, had lots of charts on it, and it basically said when he was a kid and Bill Davis was premier, if you adjust for inflation, that basically the debt carried by each individual citizen 35 years ago is higher than what it is today, in spite of the fact that let's say the debt for the province of Ontario, $350 billion today, obviously a third of that size back, maybe even a quarter of that size back then, and yet we're less indebted today because the economy is bigger, the population is bigger. Does that all make sense?
I did not look at the chart, so I can't directly comment, but I would say intuitively that makes sense. And I think, again, people can see that in the types of services that they're getting from government.
But his point was we're doing a lot of fretting for nothing because it's actually not as bad as the big numbers seem, because the numbers are bigger in every way. The population's bigger. Expenditures are bigger. The size of the economy is bigger.
Yeah, but the debt-to-GDP ratio is bigger, too.
Yes.
We did not have a 40% debt-to-GDP ratio.
We did not. It was 13.
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure where he's going with that. Measured relative to the economy, the debt is much larger in Ontario than it was. And to come to your question about the tax increases, they certainly did in the 80s and 90s. We raised taxes substantially at the federal level, trying to get a grip on the galloping debts. And it didn't work. It slowed it a bit. It was only when they finally brought in the Martin budget that they brought it to heel. It doesn't necessarily lead to higher taxes in the future, not always and everywhere. But when you look at the size of the aging population problem and the kinds of debts that implies, Bill Robson, who I think you've had on this show many times, has done numbers on this, where the unfunded liability represented by a population aging, he estimates on the order of $2.8 trillion. And if you put that into sort of annualized terms of what kind of tax increase that implies, it's about 7 percentage points of GDP, which, as it happens, is about as much as the feds now collect in personal income taxes. That's a substantial tax increase that's implied. It's not inevitable, it's not unavoidable, but we've got a real problem on our hands, and it may shock you to hear, even I don't think that you could just cut spending or reform the healthcare system. That kind of debt to GDP ratio that implies, we have to start talking about the GDP as well.
You mentioned Bill Robson, and we have a quote. Standing by. Here we go. Sheldon, you want to put this graphic up, and I shall read along. For the impulsive throwing all budget balancing concerns during this election campaign to the four winds must be a gas. What if you had no bottom line constraint in your household budget? You could eat, drink, indulge, even quit your job, or in your business, first class everything, and forget sales. At the C.D. Howe Institute and other charities, gala events and all the perks, even if we deliver no value and attract no donations. Wouldn't that be great? Well, actually, no, it wouldn't be great. Thoughtless overindulgence is bad at home, in business, or anywhere else, especially in government. Bill Robson, president of the C.D. Howe Institute. Garima, there are a bunch of things to unpack here, but let's start with this. We often hear people say, you know, would you do this at your kitchen table? Would you run your household budget the way a government runs its budget? Is that an appropriate analogy to make?
I don't think so. And I think, it's to push back on that quote, is this idea that governments have one bottom line to reach. Governments may have many multiple bottom lines to manage, and that requires managing trade-offs as well. And that is different than households that have bills to balance, mortgage payments to balance, rent payments to balance. I think that there's a bit of an unfairness in using household ways of managing budgets compared to an economy or a government, in that households have a natural progression, right? They start small, they grow, and over time, due to the life cycle, will become small again. And so you make investments in either purchasing a home or taking on loans to go to post-secondary education, for example, in knowing that those investments will hopefully make a return. The economy, however, has to continue to grow under our current system. And I'm not going to get into the climate change implications of that. But the economy needs to consistently grow as our population grows. And without economic growth, without growth in the services that people need, we actually will see a shrinking of the economy and a shrinking of the services that people need. So I don't think that it's fair to suggest that a government manage its affairs just like a household would.
You know what, I think it's a lousy analogy anyway, because households do not have zero at the end of their balance sheet. Otherwise, you never have anybody with a mortgage. People borrow. Corporations borrow. If corporations stop borrowing, there'd be no corporate bonds. You wouldn't need them.
I don't know that it's a question of we shouldn't allow borrowing. Obviously, you have to borrow. You want to buy a house, you got to borrow. You want to buy a car, you got to borrow. The question is, should we spend like drunken sailors?
No, you borrow based on your needs, but that's debt that you have to take on, and governments have a lot more of it that they have to take on because of obligations that they have that the ordinary household and the ordinary corporation does not have.
But they also have a different political imperative. So the fundamental difference is households can't pass their debts on to future generations. Politics, people do this all the time. Now, it's one thing, as Brian says, if you're borrowing for something that pays dividends for many decades to come, that's a different kind of borrowing than if you're borrowing for current consumption, which in household terms would be borrowing to pay for the groceries. The problem is we do a lot of that. A lot of the money that we're being talked about in this election campaign is current consumption. It's transfers, and that sort of stuff should not be done on the borrowed money. And we're doing it anyway. So those future generations don't get a seat at that table. They don't get a vote in these elections where we're busy giving ourselves goodies at their expense. That's problematic, both from the standpoint of what Bill was talking about, without a budget constraint, you don't tend to spend money carefully. But it's also problematic, it seems to me, just from a democratic standpoint. We should be taking their interest into account, and we're not.
Well, having said that, Paul Krugman makes the case weekly in the New York Times that money is cheap today. And there is no better time to run massive debts and deficits than now if you want to build those bridges, if you want to build those subways, if you want to put up those wind turbines, whatever. Is that a good argument in your view?
I think it's one important argument to look at, and we do want to see an increase in infrastructure. That's one important investment that can help to grow the economy in the future. I think that education is another investment that can help to produce a growing economy and a prepared economy in the future. If we looked at healthcare and investing in people's health now instead of preparing to fix sickness later, we'd actually be saving a lot of money so people could be more productive at work and have a higher well-being at home. And those are all productive investments that I think you're talking about and that we should be talking about a little more. And it's true, money is very cheap right now, not record low, but very near record low. So
well,
building some of those
in
things.
In some economies, just not ours.
Yeah.
But it's not zero. So there's still a cost of borrowing. and you want to be sure that the return on that investment exceeds the cost of borrowing. Oftentimes those returns are asserted. Remember, again, we're in the political environment here where you don't need to prove your case. You just have to wave around a hand and say, oh, this will pay all kinds of dividends in future. I'd like to see a little bit more rigorous tests applied to that than we typically do. One way of testing whether something pays returns and dividends over time is what do people value it at? What are they willing to pay for it? A lot of infrastructure project nowadays could and should be, in my view, financed from the user pay. Road tolls, for example, make sense from a lot of different perspectives, one of which is you can finance them by people investing in them in the expectation of being able to collect that return, which means you could finance them with private capital, even if they're public projects. You can finance them with private capital rather than public capital. And if you can, in my view, you should. The reason being, tax dollars are scarce. You should use tax dollars for things that can only be paid for through taxes, things like public goods, things like police and fire. Reserve tax dollars for those. If you can pay for it another way, you probably should, and that leave yourself that much more room on the tax bill.
Can I just push back on that a little bit? That there are things that maybe could be paid for by private capital, but don't necessarily have to be, and might actually be cheaper for everyone if we paid for them together, like the roads that we drive on, the healthcare that we all use at different points in our lives, and potentially lowering the cost of education for all in order for more people to have access. And if we have road tolls and those other things, there's lots of people that don't have access to the services that we need in order to grow the economy, and that then continues to look at an increase in inequality as some people have more productive time than others.
With just a few minutes to go here, we should say for the record, there is one political party in this election campaign that has promised to balance the budget in 2 years. It's the People's Party. Maxime Bernier has said debts and deficits matter, and we're going to tackle this in 2 years' time. Brian, can you balance the budget in 2 years, as Mr. Bernier is suggesting?
I don't see how you can do that without big tax increases and a lot less spending. And if Bernier is talking about cutting program spending, as Andrew pointed out, some of that is fixed. You cannot change that. The discretionary part of any government's budget is much smaller than most voters think.
I know you wrote a piece the other day saying that you liked some of the stuff in the Conservative platform, that if you're conservatively inclined, there's actually some stuff in there that you would like. We'll ignore for a second the fact that they dropped it on a Friday before a Thanksgiving holiday weekend, just to make sure that you couldn't debate it at the debates or have people take much attention to it. But have you come to a conclusion yet about which platform out there is the best on fiscal health and discipline?
No, I mean, what you can say is that there's a lower spending track in the Conservative platform than in the other parties. It's not hard since the other parties, I mean, the Greens are promising to increase spending $70 billion in 1 year. The NDP would do it $35 billion in 1 year. The Tory track is, people are talking about austerity and deep cuts. It's basically within a few $1 billion of the spending track outlined in the 2019 budget. Mm-hmm. So the track that the Liberals were boasting about this spring as being the height of generosity and munificence had suddenly turned into doom, despair, and gloom. I think people need to, get a bit of perspective on this. I'm troubled by the fact that the Tories, like the Ontario government, the Ford government, seem to say, oh, we can just do it by freezing things and nobody needs to lose their job. And maybe that's true, but I'd like to see a lot more documentation of that. And more generally, I wish Conservatives would get out of this idea of we're just going to take give everybody a haircut off the top. We're just going to cut a little bit here and there, because all you do wind up doing is just annoying everybody without making fundamental choices. And there's lots of things that the federal government and the provincial governments are doing that governments probably shouldn't be in the business of doing at all. That if you made better choices about what is government for, what is its purpose, and made selections and choices that way rather than 5% off the top, I think you'd get a better result in the long run.
Well, but Kaylee, let's state the obvious here. Politicians often reflect the views of the electorate. The electorate at the moment appears not to be particularly fussed about the size of deficits or debts that provinces or countries are running. Should we therefore not be surprised at all that the parties, with the exception of the People's Party, are not running on this at all?
They're running on hopefully addressing the crises that could be coming down the pike and addressing the social issues that we have that young people want to address, that I think lots of people across all generations actually want to address. And like I said before, that's addressing climate change, reconciliation, education and training for people through transition. And if we don't do those things, then we won't have the strong economy that we have today. And we need to make sure that that's there for the future. I think people are understanding that more and more as time goes on, and it's really important to do.
Less than a minute to go. Is there one party out there whose platform, in terms of fiscal discipline, you like?
Well, none of them are exercising actual fiscal discipline. They're promising the moon. My view is that they won't be able to deliver on these promises once they get into government. Whether it's the Liberals coming back or the Conservatives coming in, they're promising far more than they'll be able to deliver.
Last 20 seconds to you. Anybody out there you like?
I think fiscal policy is inextricably tied to social policy, and so I think that the platforms actually make way for a lot of tax cuts that do those haircuts across the population and electorate, as opposed to actually digging deep into some issues that we as Canadians face.
You want a haircut?
Sure, I could use it.
As long as somebody else pays for it, eh? Yeah. Good of all of you to come in tonight and help us out with this. Kaylee Thiessen from Unifor, and Brian Milner, Globe and Mail. Andrew Coyne, you can read him in the National Post. Garima Talwar Kapoor, first time on television. Well done today. Formerly of the Ministry of Finance, now from Maitrey. Thanks, everybody.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.